Hey, Jamie, how's it going?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Good evening there, Sean. I'm
Thank
in.
you very much for joining us.
No problem, my pleasure.
Yeah, so you could have gone down the career path of being a criminal, not a cop. Could you give us a bit of background as to your career trajectory?
Sure. I mean, maybe perhaps not to your dizzy heights, if you don't mind me saying, with respect. But no, I probably was going down a bit of a slippery slope, but at a very young age. So I was. It was pretty much sort of, petty stuff, petty misdemeanors and crimes. But I was certainly getting a bit more savvy in the process of doing what I was doing. I was pretty smart. I was pretty switched on, and I was perhaps a bit of a ringleader with some of my young associates at the time. But for the record, we were only talking, 14, 15, sort of 16 years old. But certainly if I'd have carried on going down that slippery slope, and you get where I'm coming from, I probably would have wound up in some sort of Borstal or, big boy penitentiary, um, and God knows where else. So, yeah, I managed to get a grip, if you will, on my behaviour when I was quite young, and sort of turn it around. And I guess the irony was, as you mentioned to your audience here, that I actually don't hold it against me, folks, but I actually ended up serving as fully fledged sort of full time ROSA, or a police officer, some years later. But then anyway, it's a bit of a strange old story. So a bit of a comeback. My life story in a nutshell, is a bit of a double comeback kid type story. So it's a bit of a comeback from the early years, how I managed to sort of twist it around and turn it around for the better, and sort of follow, let's just say, the slightly more righteous path in life versus, the second part of the story is how I kind of metaphorically got shot down in flames, as it were, piloting a light aircraft in the US, and then
Before we
had to
go
sort of
there,
fight
Jamie,
back from that.
before we go there, what part of the country did you grow up in, and how long were you in the police?
Yeah, so it was only a relatively short time, but I grew up in Leighton Buzzard, which is a small market town in Bedfordshire. So pretty much for your international viewers, we're talking, 30, 35 miles north of London, in the sort of southeast of England. And so, yeah, I was growing up, the era would have been sort of the mid to late 80s, when I was a bit of a bad boy, and, getting up to no good, and sort of stealing from, various different um, venues, and breaking into a few shops just for sort of shits and giggles, as it were. But anyway, it was
Did you get into
pretty
the
obvious.
raves? Did you get into the rave scene around then, late
Well, it
80s?
was it was my era. I mean, we're probably not dissimilar sort of age group, in terms of.
52 I am.
Okay, I'm a little bit younger, so I'm now 46, and but definitely that was there. The big old smiley face thing was going on, and I was very
Yeah.
much aware of it. I was probably just that little bit younger than you, perhaps, but certainly, I did dabble in a little bit of the substances, as it were, growing up. Um, Again, I probably didn't have your kind of prowess in graduation with substances, from what I've learned. But
Did you get to any of
I
the
did
big
dabble.
parties? Did you get to any
I
big parties or
listen. There were.
Glastonbury?
No,
Glastonbury?
no, no, not quite Glastonbury, but there were a few sort of local things going on that I kind of, sort of dabbled in, and kind of got hoiked into at a young age. And there was, I mean, probably the biggest things were going on in my area. I don't know if you remember this. So the rave scene was getting quite big commercially, and they had big clubs, say Milton Keynes way, and they had sort of, well, big old raves, if that's what you want to call it. And they were literally, I don't know, on a good night, probably, couple of thousand people plus. But obviously, those venues probably maxed out at a certain capacity, probably, in terms of what the authorities could host. But it was ever so popular, and of course, I was very aware, as a young lad growing up, sort of in teens, mid-teens, and so on, that people were doing, whether it was E or speed or ecstasy, and it was all kind of going around. And the rave scene and that big smiley face kind of era, and all the house music was very much was a colourful part of life, as it were, for that demographic, definitely.
Do you still listen to any of that music?
Um, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily put it on out of kind of said choice, but I have an appreciation for it. So let's say I'm driving on a Friday night and I drive in and out of London or whatever, and it pops up on Radio 1 or maybe Radio 1 Extra, whatever it is, and they're blasting out. They're doing a bit of a session. I'm thinking, yeah, this is pretty cool. It takes me back. And you end up sort of following it a bit, kind of getting into it. But there was definitely something about it. And one of the DJs, I think, on Radio 1 the other night, like, spilt out a couple of the old Happy Mondays tunes, and that really took me back, to sort of like immediately to kind of like the mid-90s, because they were like, they had some major success, didn't they, with some of their tracks, and just the music.
My melon, man.
Exactly. I think that was it. I think that was the one they played. And it really takes me back,
Yeah. Okay, so go on then. You got into the police for how long?
So initially, I only did like sort of 3 years. So I did my probation, which is like a 2-year period before you're fully fledged, and then I was in for about another year, and then I decided to take a sabbatical, like an official career break. I was interested in a bit more of a global opportunity, perhaps bigger picture kind of challenge and adventure, and that was really what I was all about. And the police was great as it was, for a young buck like me at the time, and I was interested in, what the job could offer me. But I found it somewhat repetitive. After in my third year, I was pretty much, it dawned on me I was kind of going to the same old jobs, all the time, whether it was burglaries or robberies or thefts or sort of domestic disputes or assaults or some kind of violent act that you were kind of you were trying to deal with, and it just, you're kind of dealing with the darker side of life, and after a while, it sort of grated on me, and I thought, what, I don't know if I can do, say, figuratively, another 25 years in this game. I think there's more to life, for me ahead, and I want to sort of test the water a bit. So that was literally what I went to do, test the water, because I took my sabbatical, and in those days, amazingly, they actually offered to give me up to 5 years. So I kind of like almost chewed the arm off the chief superintendent that kind of painted that out for me and said, yeah, you can take up to 5 years, providing it's for kind of good reason and with merit that you're going. And I said, look, with all sincerity, I want to go away and do this bit of travel. I had some plans to do a bit more diving. I was big into my scuba diving. I had an instructor ticket at that stage. So that was a big pull for me, if you understand, to get away and do that. And I ended up basically leaving the job to do some exped work and some diving work in that field. And I worked in, like, briefly in the Caribbean, briefly in Egypt on some short stints commercially, teaching. And then I did I sort of headed up the training for a very remote expedition with scuba diving, teaching again, and mentoring and guiding and looking after people in the Philippines in a really remote location. And then I got back and to the UK, and I was considering something a bit more structured. So I used the time effectively to go off and do a bit more study. And I went off to university and did a BA honours, it was, in Scandinavian languages, bizarrely.
Wow.
And so that's what I did. And there's a bit of a family kind of influence, perhaps, or a connection on my mother's side. And I was really curious. So long story short there is I went out to Norway, and I lived in sort of rural Norway, which was a great place to learn the language, because the Scandinavians do tend to speak it pretty well. But if you go rural, then they're a little bit more sort of reticent. So it's up to you to try to learn the language and converse. And it was a good place for me to expose, to learn the language, that is. And it was a great fun. It was a tremendous outdoor sort of playground for me, Norway. And I was big into the outdoors, if you understand. So I loved the mountaineering side of it, the skiing, the backcountry ski touring, deep snow, and getting out there on the skis, walking with big pack on my back, sort of Langlauf. And I was kind of developing a lot of personal skills. And I took my dive gear out there. I was diving in the deep, dark sort of fjords of central Norway, thereabouts, where the fjord runs deep into the country. So I did a bit of scuba. I was even teaching some of the locals out there. And that was a lot of fun, for me. And kind of all the time I'm sort of progressing. I'm sort of maybe developing myself as an individual, and a lot of life experience. And also when I did start training process or that study at university back in the UK, I joined the army as well at that time. So I joined Cambridge University Officer Training Corps, and it was a wonderful, a bit of a recruitment workshop really. And for the British Army to go on and serve regular, so full time or reserve. And I ended up choosing to take a reserve path. So following my journey with Cambridge OTC, I ended up doing some exposure with the British Army that led me to go and do sort of highlights would have been like Cambrian patrols in the Black Mountains, Brecon Beacons. I did a P company, used a selection for the parachute regiment, quite an infamous arduous course for the paras within the British Army. And I surprised myself. I got through that course, and then I did a short service stint, like a commissioning course at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, and I got through that. That was only a relatively short course, about 1 month. And then it kind of gave me food for thought about the army as a career. And then I ended up getting a recommendation and then volunteering to go forwards to do selection for UK Special Forces. So that was under the umbrella of UKSF. And I ended up going into to do selection with a unit called 21 or 21st Regiment Special Air Service, SAS. And I did that for a few years. So probably about 5 years in general. I was probably a reservist for about 7.5 years. So 5 years laterally with the SF unit. And then, not a huge amount really, I mean, for the record, it's not, a boast certainly. I mean, I served, yes, and I was sort of badged, as it were, but I didn't really get to utilize it in the full sense because I was due to deploy summer of 2007 on an operational deployment. And I had been all over the world in training in many different types of weird and wonderful environments, from a bit of jungle to, sort of hot deserts and sort of Central Africa and North Africa. And I did some temperate locations in sort of more southerly areas of Europe, a bit more in Scandinavia, up in the very far north of the Arctic Circle. So we're heading up towards the extreme north of Sweden, but right up into the heartland of the Arctic Circle. I mean, really, my biggest personal gains was that I did wonderful exposure in some of those environments. So on the mercury, if you like, on the thermometer, I mean, I got to work in temperatures of like minus 45 degrees Celsius up in the Arctic regions, to plus 45 Celsius in the heat of the deserts and whatnot. So, some real extremes in terms of how to function as a human and certainly as a soldier, do your job and the taskings that you're there to do as a soldier. Not easy. But I mean, ultimately, truth is, I didn't get to use it in earnest in this sort of operational sense, but I did train all over the world and I was badged. But, in a way, all of that whole journey that I described to you really was all about me as an individual learning to dig deep, as it were, and to really find it within myself to kind of hold on at all costs and dig deep. Because, I mean, that's the essence of the work in SF. It's not easy. You've always got to sort of pull it out of the bag and dig deep in the patrols and really pull on your energy reserves to get through it all and work for the sake of your own sustenance and that of your oppos, your colleagues in the patrol. So I learned a lot about myself as an individual, and I certainly learned to dig deep. And then just completely out of the random sort of life bag, as it were, I was due to deploy, like I mentioned, autumn 2007. So summer 2007, I made a conscious personal decision to go to fly in the US. And I went there because of a chance of getting the flying done in a relatively short time frame, because of good, better weather in Florida on the East Coast, and the chance of getting it done in say 5-6 week window. And then fast forward 1 month, and I'm now 1 month into the course, and I'm now pilot in command, sort of flying solo. And on this one particular day, I'm working up in the pattern at 1,000 feet, indicated I had an engine fire. So I looked out the left-hand canopy window, and I see a thin streak of visible yellow, sort of orange flame. And then I had to sort of double take. And then immediately, as I'm banking around and making my final left turn into wind, the fire breached the cockpit internally. So I look at my feet working on the rudder pedals down below, and I look down and I see the flame. And this is the start of the life changer for me. So little did I realize that fire built up in the cockpit. And as I'm descending from that 1,000 feet where it had breached, let's say I got to about 500 feet, so roughly half the height now towards the ground, 500 feet indicated. And the fire is now about belly height. And at that stage, I mean, remember, I'm in a tiny 2-seater cockpit, so I'm like gas mark 5 in the oven. Not good position, not a good place to be. So I made a decision to follow the emergency drill, the protocol that I'd been taught, and I'd rehearsed it over and over. And my mind reverberated back to the training and the drill, and I systematically just shut everything off in sequence, like on the dashboard, on the instrument panel in front, just everything sort of off in sequence. And I'm gliding in, descending. And then as I'm getting lower, very low level, couple hundred feet, I basically rip off my headset because like the comms with the air traffic below was kind of futile. I was too low and it was all going on. So I took my headset off. I threw it in the opposite footwell to get it out of the way because I was a bit worried about the cable and being a hindrance, that flex lead cable where it was plugged in. And I was able to unbuckle the 3-point harness around my waist and sort of wriggle out of it from the shoulders and the waist, open the left-hand canopy door, and now, 200 feet, 100 feet, and I've veered away from the concrete runway. I'm heading towards a grassy embankment, which is like flat ground, but grass. I knew it was going to be quite soft because of recent heavy rainfall. And I'm heading towards the grass. And then like literally 100 feet or thereabouts, I open the left-hand canopy door, punch that open, that flicks up to the vertical position. And then literally sort of 50 feet, left hand on the control stick, right hand on the throttle. I've knocked the throttle off. I've flared and cut out and scrubbed off as much airspeed as I dare. And then I'm now running in probably 30 knots. About maybe when I get to about 20 feet, I'm like Jack Rabbit. I clamber up onto the seat, climb through the door aperture, which is now open. Remember, I've opened it. And then I clamber from the left seat onto the left wing, and I take a giant leap, snap my feet and knees together in the air.
God.
So I estimate I jumped from a height of about 15 feet, and I was running in at about 30 knots. And I landed in the long grass, sack of spuds. I mean, it's nothing to be, sort of bravado about. I landed like a sack of spuds. My intention was to do a good old sort of, parachute sort of roll, sort of hitting the ground, sort of start parachute style landing, sort of roll, as I'd been sort of taught in the process of my military kind of career and training. And I've done that again and again and again. And the intention was to roll out, but it was too fast. It was too sloppy. I remember I hit the ground like a sack of spuds. So I landed feet first, I thrust forward, I smashed my face. I end up with bilateral nasal fractures, supraorbital eye socket fractures. I mean, multiple soft tissue lacerations through the nose, through the lip, through the alar, the side of the nose. I mean, I was a massive trauma. I had inadvertently ruptured my large intestine internally, lacerated one flank of my liver down one side, which was bleeding. But the worst of it was I was 63% third and fourth degree burn. And the fourth degree burns means there was some exposed bone. And that was the life changer, all of that. So the burns meant that the career, if you will, that I was doing before my work with the SF, or indeed considering the policing or whatever, no chance I could go back to that kind of operational government work by any attempts or by any count of the imagination. So the rug, my life as I knew it, the rug got pulled from underneath me, and it was a life changer. So it's not a sob story as such, but it was a very bad thing happened to me that day in 19th of August 2007. And then luckily, 14 years on, this is me now. And I mean, yes, I'm scarred to hell, as you can see. And I've actually, for the record, I know you mentioned it to the viewers, but the truth is I've had 62 ops under general anesthetic. So they knocked me out 62 times to do a lot of the repairs and the skin grafts and laser work and God knows what. I've had a lot of work done. And, I was drug induced in America for the first 6 months in drug induced coma. medical bill was like 2.6 million US dollars, to give you an indication of what they did for me out there. And I'm a lucky man. I mean, some might say otherwise because of maybe how I look or the scars, maybe, some of the hair or whatever gone. But you know what? I mean, it's how you look at it and it's how you perceive it. And for me, I learned to accept it. 3 years of sort of healing physically, 5 years mental healing and acceptance in here, in the grey matter, coming to terms with it and accepting it. And once I got beyond those obstacles, I was able to look forward and accept the new life and the new version of me, Jamie Hull version 2.0. And that's what I'm all about. So I like to share the story. And I just wrote the book, with Penguin, Life on a Thread. The idea was that I could share the story to a greater audience and hopefully inspire people, because if I can do it, I can come back from real darkness. I think there's hope for a lot of people out there. And again, that's my bottom line. That's what I'm all about, Sean.
Wow, you're a brilliant speaker, Jamie, and you really took us there. The plane coming down, 15 feet, the doors open, the grass, the calculation. When you rolled onto the glass, or landed on the glass like a sack of spuds, did you go unconscious at that point once you got out of the situation?
Yeah, it's a really good. I was like momentarily stunned, but I didn't sort of knock out. I didn't knock myself out. I remember coming momentarily stunned. It was like I probably had that impact and my brain sort of froze for a minute. And then I remember coming to, but I wasn't sort of knocked out, for the record. I wasn't unconscious. And then I remember my right shoulder, it's difficult to show you because I've got this thick shirt on, but my right shoulder was still burning like a Roman candle. So I figured I was actually patting it out. And also my right scalp was still burning. There was an aspect of my right scalp that was still on fire. So I'm patting that out as well. And that was like Roman candle, Roman candle. And fortunately, I patted out. And then I quickly got myself into the fetal position, remembering the aircraft, which was obviously still airborne on its own now without me, the pilot. And then I remember getting fetal position and looking through the slits of my fingers. And I just caught a glimpse of the aircraft in the distance. So if I use my phone here, in the distance, I saw her. She was nose heavy and left wing down. And that was pretty much the sort of, the angle of that I'd witnessed it going in. And when I caught a glimpse of it initially, she's probably no more than about 70 feet away, perhaps the length of 2 double-decker like London buses, no more than that distance away. And when I first caught a glimpse, the propeller, so that bit at the front, which was still kind of spinning, was about the height of perhaps you, Sean, roughly about a 6-foot man. Imagine, 70 feet away from me, like 2 buses away. And I just watched it while she was still airborne effectively. And she was nose heavy, left wing down. I watched her crash land, ugly, crashing, crumpling noise. And then there was a subsequent, like, pregnant pause. And then boom, after about maybe 8 to 10 seconds. And I was literally just on the receiving edge of that blast, luckily outside of the fire radius of the blast, but not outside of the shockwave. And it was that shockwave that went through me and back again, and it like drew all the air out of my sort of lung, and I just couldn't breathe. I mean, I was like holding on for grim life. Hence the title of my book, Life on a Thread, because that's how I described myself, the vulnerability that I felt. And immediately afterwards, when the pain washed over me like a tsunami of pain, honestly, I don't know how the hell I was able to hold on. Again, I felt like a mouse on a thread, that the thread was going to snap. And that would have been me, like, into oblivion. I wouldn't have come back.
Wow, they've got to make this into a movie. We've only got 2 minutes left, but I've got a couple of quick questions. Perhaps you could do them quickly.
Sure.
Do you have fear of flying? That's come from Lisa, or fear of fire. And the other one,
I did go back to flying just quickly. So okay. I didn't go back to do like the full PPL fixed wing, because the reality was I was considering a commercial career. I would never pass the medical now. And indeed, I've been tested for commercial medical. I wouldn't pass the grade. My right ear is pretty much had a lot of damage and like tinnitus. It's not happening for me. So, and that was from that blast that I described when the aircraft crashed in the distance. I did, however, to answer the question, I did go back to flying, but this was a bit bizarre. So I got a scholarship opportunity sponsored by Boeing and the Air League. Thank you very much. And the two entities funded me to do a ballooning scholarship, and I did my training in Italy. So in the north, a place called Mondovì, close to Milano airport in the north, and I did my full training, and I licensed as a balloon/airship pilot out there. So that's my new flying sort of story, aviation. So I've definitely got an interest, but I'm never going to make the kind of commercial grade now. That's just what it is.
Congratulations. And we have limited time on these live streams, but if you ever want to come into the studio and tell your story at length, I would be honored. And I can see, there's so many lessons here. People who are stressed out about small things in life, your story really is a yardstick to put things in perspective, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now. So I'll urge people to go to your links, which are going to be below this video. We got your website, which is jamiehull.co.uk. We'll have the link to your book. And can people reach you on social media, Jamie?
Yeah. So I've got a pretty big following. I've got sort of blue tick accounts on both Facebook and Instagram that have just been sort of verified for legitimacy with both Facebook and Instagram. So you can find me Jamie Hull on Facebook, my page, and indeed my profile, Jamie Hull, that's Hull. And also on Instagram, I'm denoted as I am Jamie Hull 1. So you'll find me on there as well, folks.
Fantastic.
And my website is jamiehull.co.uk. Information about the book and the links and all the rest of it. But thank you.
Yeah, huge thank you for spending time with us this evening, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Thanks,
Thank you very much, Sean.
Cheers. Take care.
Man, thank you.
Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.